This is the High-Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman from the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour and the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman and the FFPC on Twitter at FFPC. Before we get into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can get a listeners-only 10% discount to RotoViz by using the code RVRadio2022. That's RVRADIO2022. Your subscription gives you unlimited access to all of the RotoViz content and tools, and it supports the podcast channel. Now, without further ado, here's the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. Happy holidays, everybody, and welcome into the latest episode of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. I am Eric Balkman from the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and the High-Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. You can follow me on the X at Eric Balkman. Want to remind everybody that you can go to myffpc.com right now to play not one, not two, but 3 weekly challenges. No draft, no salary cap. Just choose 10 or 12 players if you want to play with kickers and defenses by either Thursday's kickoff, Saturday's kickoff, Sunday's kickoff. You can play all 3 of those. You can play one of those, 2 of those, whatever you want. And then just watch those points pile up throughout the weekend. Remember, only 1 player per team. You can enter for $35 or $200, win up to $2,500. That's at myffpc.com. Don't forget about the FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge. Actually, we have 2 playoff challenges this year. 2 great contests, the same awesome format that you're used to. There's no draft or salary cap in these. You're going to pick 12 players and watch them ride throughout the duration of the NFL postseason. You can win $500,000 there or $100,000 there, depending upon if you want to play for a $200 entry fee or a $35 entry fee. Again, all of those contests conveniently located for you at myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends and your enemies, and get notified every time we go live like we are tonight. Tonight's extra special guest is a winner of 18-plus leagues, probably more than 18. That's what I counted. I assume it's more because it probably is. In his FFPC high-stakes fantasy football career. He is the owner of FantasyMojo.com. You follow him on the X at FantasyMojo. Please welcome in Darren Armani. Money Armani, welcome in tonight, man.
Eric, how we doing, man? We're almost to the end of the line here. We started drafting 11 months ago. Right? We were doing drafts right before the Super Bowl started last year.
and we're probably we're probably closer to being 11 days away from drafting again, right? It'll probably be like, it won't be 11 days, but I bet in about a month or so we'll have drafts up at the FFPC with the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, so on and so forth. I want to ask right away. Now, we were talking about this right before we went on air. You are more of a best ball type player. You love the best ball. You play a lot of best ball. You win a lot at best ball. However, you have a team that put up 185 this past week in the main event, and now you've moved into the top 60 overall in the championship round as you are that much closer to winning a $1 million grand prize. How do you feel about that squad specifically's ability to ascend up even further where you could get to that top spot in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, well, the team has to stay healthy for sure. I don't have as much depth on there as I like, but it's very top heavy. But the key things that are carrying me and why I'm optimistic I might be able to keep hovering up in the top is because I bought into the Mahomes Kelce stack all off season. And I've been, I have a pretty high percentage of that. So this is one of the teams that has skated through. Even though Mahomes has sort of not performed where people thought he would, at this point, there aren't that many Mahomes Kelce stacks in the main event. So there's 22 of them in the championship round. Now, last week when I was on Goat District and Deep End, I had brought this up and I said, well, I was like the 18th team out of the 22, ranked across the leaderboard. Right now I'm the top team with the Kelce Mahomes stack. So given the matchups that they have the next couple of weeks at home, I've got to be optimistic that maybe now is the time they really explode, because last week maybe that was a tough draw with the Patriots. And then the other thing that's that I just saw today using a tool on our site. There's a Stack Explorer that lets you sort of dive into the team compositions of who's in the championship round. There's only 3 teams that have the Evans-Godwin combo, and they're kind of like peaking now. And I'm one of 3 teams that has that combo. So, keep it going, and who knows what will happen.
Why were you, and obviously FantasyMojo.com is where you get all this data because you publish all this data here. I'm kind of curious, what did you see last year? And I know everybody was on the Mahomes Kelce stack. Well, I should say everybody, but a lot of people were on the Mahomes Kelce stack last year. A ton of people were on it again this year. Knowing as many people that were probably going to be on it this year, why were you still big into grabbing both those players?
It was a ridiculous advance rate. It was 75% of the teams that drafted Kelce Mahomes last year advanced to the championship round. This year, it didn't deliver. Like the draft capital was last year as it is this year. Mm-hmm. So now it's a more expensive stack. It kind of normalized about 20%, which is basically average. But I figured even if it kind of regressed a little bit, you still are going to get a bunch of those teams through. So, and then looking at the schedule, and here we are. In the preseason, if you remember, everybody was about the Bengals Kansas City game, week 17, mm-hmm. right? It didn't really, because Burrow got hurt, it didn't really turn out like how we thought it would, but it's setting up to be a pretty big game. So, still, there's a lot of reasons to still to be optimistic about that.
Knowing that you have the top Mahomes Kelce stack in the main event championship round right now, knowing that there is only, what'd you say, 18 of them right now in the main event?
There's 22.
22. Okay. Yeah. So 22. So knowing that you have the top one in that, is it just a slam dunk decision? Like, no question, I'm playing Mahomes at home against the Raiders this week over Kyler Murray, who goes to play at Chicago. Not even a question for you based on, game theory, really kind of where you are in the standings and what you could do if Mahomes and Kelce go off, right?
Yeah, I mean, now I kind of have ascended, and I want to keep that position. And if I play the narrative out, and like this is why I have it, so I'm not going to give up. I'm all in on that right now, mm-hmm. right? So I'm sticking with the stack, and hopefully it'll play out. It's a pretty decent setup for these last couple of weeks. So Las Vegas this week and Cincy next week, both at home. And with Taylor Swift, like in the stadium, it keeps Kelce motivated. So we're hoping he, that plays into his performance.
This is what it's come to, fantasy football in 2023.
I mean, it is really a factor. I mean, it does, like, it's a real thing. Like he wants to impress this girl, right? So he's got to perform at home in these games.
Like if you would have asked me that however many years ago, like, I remember one, I would assume we were talking about Ciara and Russell Wilson, not Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. And by the way, and I don't know if I've said this on the show, and this is just a little bit of a departure. I am not a fan of Taylor Swift's music, and it's not for me not giving it a shot. Like, I've listened to it. I've given it multiple. It's just not me. That's fine. I get it. Uber respect for what she's been able to accomplish as an entertainer, as an entrepreneur, as one of the most famous, if not the most famous person in the world. And I still say this as a guy who loves fantasy football, loves the NFL, loves watching football. I think she could do a lot better than Travis Kelce. I think he's a meathead, and I don't understand why she's with him. And that will conclude our Entertainment Weekly segment on Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce tonight. But you're right. I mean, there is something to be said for that. Have we broken down? Has Fantasy Mojo broken down the stats of Travis Kelce when Taylor Swift is in the stadium versus when she's not in the stadium?
Nah, just casual observations. It seems, he seems to do a little better. Is what I've noticed, or what I'm trying to tell myself anyway. But
right,
we'll see.
Let's and I know this is painful for you, but let's talk about that Eagles game last night. 3 weeks in a row now, Philly has dropped the game. This is probably the most winnable of the last 3. And I know Jalen Hurts is under the weather. I heard, and you can maybe enlighten me on this, I heard A.J. Brown was a little bit sick coming into this game. They probably weren't the only 2 Eagles that were battling something. What did we learn, if anything, about the Eagles going forward, especially in week 16, from what we saw from them in Seattle last night, Darren?
Yeah, I think the offense is a little dysfunctional right now. But what we saw was Hurts has he's got this high floor, and you can count on him just because of he's going to get those rushing touchdowns. He gets them every week, assuming they get close to the goal line. He's getting them, and he even ran more than I thought he was last night. If he really was flu ridden, I mean, he performed above what I thought he would. People were really nervous over the weekend, with given that rosters were locked right in the championship rounds, and they didn't have any. Like that news came in after the last waiver run had finished on Sunday. So people were sweating a little bit. I was always optimistic if he got on the plane, he would have been fine. Or he was going to play. But I think so what we'll see moving forward is, he's going to get his, but the next two games are home against the Giants and the Arizona Cardinals. They should and they're motivated to win now because of these losses. So I think they're really going to put a beating on these teams. The team is really motivated to perform. If you're picking which pass catchers, I think that's going to be hit or miss. But I think 2 out of 3 of those guys each game is really going to do something big these last 2 weeks. Picking which two is going to be a bit of a dice roll. But if you've got any of them, I'm playing them.
So, okay. So while it is a dice roll, if you have Goddard, if you have Brown, if you have Smith, you have to roll the proverbial dice out there with all 3 of them these last 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, I think 2 of those 3 guys are going to eat. These next 2 weeks. It's just that they've got to, they need these games.
What about DeAndre Swift? Has the thing is with Swift is he's looked so good this year in sort of a rebound year. The problem is, as you just alluded to, is Jalen freaking Hurts when they get close to the goal line. There really is nothing there for Swift. And unless he busts one outside the 5 or catches one, he's got to get a lot of yards to be fantasy worthy. I don't know what your ownership is like on Swift. Is this a guy that you've just been rolling out there every week in the hopes of him doing something as far as getting in the end zone? Or is it more of a nuanced thing where like you can actually feel good about benching him certain weeks and certain matchups?
It's cliche, but he's better in best ball, right? And I never really attacked any of the Eagles running backs because I knew from the get-go that Hurts is the goal line back. Like he's getting all the goal line carries. Now Swift has a history of getting hurt, right? But I think maybe what we're seeing is Swift kind of wearing down a little bit. So when he first had those big games, like he was gangbusters and he was racking up the points. At this point, it's not what it was. And you see the mixing in Gainwell a little bit more. And then the game plan is it's a little more pass heavy. And, with the offense also being a little dysfunctional, Swift I think he's maybe a flex for you. I don't know that he's a slam dunk, 1 or 2 for you at this point.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. And you, by the way, championship round rosters locked. You may not have another option that's better than DeAndre Swift here going forward. I want to go back to one thing you said in talking about your 58th place team. You said that it's not a very deep team, but it's top heavy. Don't you feel like, and you've seen the numbers on this, or maybe you've never crunched them, but I feel like a lot of the times where I have guests on either this show or the HSFF Hour or what have you, I feel like a lot of those teams are not deep, but because they're not deep, they haven't. Lineup setting has been very good for them, and they're starting their optimal lineup, or at least close to their optimal lineup, every single week. Now, without buys, if you do have a shallow team, your lineup should set itself. Don't you think it's almost better to have a top-heavy team at this point, as long as the guys remain healthy?
I think it makes it easier. But so to contrast this in the KFFC, I've got a team in the championship round there. And that team is stacked. Like I've got Ferguson and Njoku and Trey McBride, for instance, at wide receiver at the tight end. And I'm picking the wrong guy every week. Right. But over on this team, it's the lineup sets itself. Now I've got a couple depth options, just a couple. Like what I've got behind my running backs is I've got so Kyron Williams is the big running back that I have, and he's been overachieving. But so I have his handcuff, and then I had Brian Robinson, and I've got Chris Rodriguez. So, but I'm starting Robinson's hurt, but I'm starting Jerome Ford. But the lineup sets itself because it's Mahomes Kelce stack. I've got Laporta. Like I've got all these guys. I did an analysis today. I put it on Twitter. Like these were the top 20 players within the top 100 teams of the main event, and I have like 4 of them. So I'm not out thinking myself. I happen to have the guys that are performing, and I'm having to start them anyway. And that's what happens a lot of times in these tourneys. Like your destiny is sort of predetermined. Like you have to have the guys that happen to perform over the championship rounds. It's hard to manufacture a title if those guys aren't already on your roster. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, absolutely.
Right now I happen to have a lot of those guys, and we'll see that as we got 2 more weeks to go through here. But that's typically what happens.
In that 100-player list that you released for the top 100 teams, I know you kind of focused on in the tweet, a lot of running backs, a lot of tight ends, not a lot of receivers. Did that data surprise you at all?
When I saw it and then I reflected on it, it didn't really surprise me because there haven't been, who had a huge game that first week. Like the Dallas guys sort of underperformed. Like the stud wideouts kind of didn't take it to the next level. It was the guys who were maybe lesser owned coming into the tourney, like Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and those types. Keenan Allen was out, right? Yep. I think he was in that list, but that's just because, the better teams were carrying him. It was a matter of volume. But most of the breakout players last week were running backs and tight ends that really had the best performances.
Did I read, and I think I saw this on your feed, if I remember correctly, which I may not have, were Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert the top stack coming into the championship round?
Yeah, they were the most owned players.
Okay.
I think that was the top owned quarterback and the top owned. Keenan Allen was actually the top owned player overall. And for him to be out really sunk a lot of teams that first week. We'll see if he comes back this week. He didn't practice today. But that it just creates dilemmas. So then Josh Palmer, and the fact that it was a Thursday night game even complicated it more. Like people may not even thought of to start Josh Palmer because they had other options later in the weekend. So we'll see.
It was his first game off IR, right?
Yeah, so you were a little hesitant. I had the start percentage for him, but it wasn't that high for Josh. Now I have Josh Palmer too. So I was kicking myself after that game because then you stare at it for 3 days like, oh man, I wish I would have had those Josh Palmer points. But then I ended up putting Godwin in there, and it was all good.
I just something that nobody will care about. I went to the Packers Buccaneers game this past Sunday, and I'm always hesitant to go to Packers games at the 1 p.m. start because of lineups and late injury scratches when inactives come out or whatever. And I was so proud of myself because I was paying attention. I sat Jalen Hurts because I didn't know what the injury thing was going to be like, or the sickness thing was going to be like for him. I sat Geno Smith for kind of the same reason. And all those guys were benched in my leagues for either Baker Mayfield or Brock Purdy. Fantastic, right? Hey, great job, Balky. You are the man. Well, the one thing I forgot, because I was so proud of myself and making sure these quarterbacks, I left Chris Olave in 4 lineups, which is just, so irritating. Now, only one of those, I think 3 leagues, it may not matter. One of those, it could cost me big. And I will never go to another 1 p.m. Packers game again until I forget about this Olave thing, and then I'll try to psych myself up to do it again. It was so unfortunate.
Yeah, you really are, like, when you go to the live games, you really are out of the news cycle. You're not plugged. There's so many distractions. Mm-hmm. Like, I go to quite a few Eagles games, and I try to make sure before I leave, like, I have the lineup set as good as I can. But if there's like anything unexpected happens, you're probably going to miss it. Just reception on the cell phone is bad, and it's hard to. You're not as plugged in as you would be at home.
Yeah, and like, especially like everybody jamming up there, like at the stadium, like you're not like we had digital tickets, and I went with my brother, and he couldn't even like get a signal because he stupidly didn't transfer his tickets from Ticketmaster to his wallet on his phone. So we were just trying to get in. I didn't even think about the Olave thing. And here's what ticks me off. When I was setting my lineup at like 6:00 Sunday morning, I knew that Olave and Nico Collins probably weren't playing. And for whatever reason, I took Collins out of all my lineups, but I left Olave in all of them. Like, it's almost to the point where it's just meant to be screwing this up.
Yeah, because you're in a rush just to get to the game. Your whole routine is like out of whack.
Yes, that's totally right. Totally right. And plus the Packers lost. It was really unfortunate. we move on here, as we always do. We wash it off, we put it behind us, and we get set for Week 16. The Bengals are getting set for Week 16, perhaps without Jamar Chase. He has an AC joint sprain, according to Jordan Schultz from Bleacher Report. He is expected to miss time, and you would think that he does not play against the Steelers this weekend. Okay, let's just worry about this weekend. We'll figure out that Chiefs game next week. But what about this weekend? Steelers, Bengals, you're looking at Jake Browning throwing to T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. What do you do with those two specific receivers, Darren? Is there value, again, knowing that not a ton of Higgins teams in the championship round, definitely not a lot of Boyd teams in the championship round? Is this a spot where if you're way down, you would insert those guys in? Or is this a spot, even if you're sort of high up on the leaderboard, you still might trot those guys out there because of the variance, because these guys could put you over the top, and because not a lot of people will have these guys? What's the game theory? How do we analyze this for the Bengals receivers this weekend?
Yeah, I think you got to play Higgins, right? Because he's going to step in there and be the number one guy. Now, Boyd is, you see a lot of these waiver wire columns, and you see Boyd as a guy, but Boyd is really what is his ceiling? His ceiling isn't that great. So in the context of it, the championship round, I think he's maybe a flex if you need him. I wouldn't, he's not a slam dunk start for me. So he's more like a usable week kind of guy, which might be nice depending on your situation with your roster. If he gives you an additional option. But Boyd, I'm a little bit iffy about. Just historically, he hasn't been a guy that's been reliable from my perspective. So
did Chase get hurt early in that Bengals game on Saturday?
I think it was midway through, or it was
midway,
might have been, but it was weird. He landed, and then he did. It wasn't like he got smashed. I think he landed on it, and then he started favoring his shoulder.
Right.
It didn't look like it was that big of a deal, but he's apparently it's going to be maybe a couple week injury.
To your point, Boyd, again, Chase probably played about half that game. Boyd, 2 catches, 53 yards, and one of those catches was for 44 yards. So there is some, you're not only playing with fire if you decide to throw Boyd in there. You got the kerosene in one hand, and you got a whole box of matches in the other one with Boyd. So again, unless you're way down and you really need to make a move this week. But historically, Darren, don't you normally wait till week 17 to start doing desperation stuff like that?
Well, we're a week in. I think it's probably viable to start doing that now. And like you said, that's another factor. How far down the board are you? So Tyler Boyd is owned on about 6% of the teams, which is middle tier. It's not super low owned, but and again, this is the tools on my site, the Stack Explorer. You can see exactly who are the Boyd teams above me. You can do that even deeper analysis and say, how much more leverage do I get if I throw in a Tyler Boyd if the guys above me, might not have him on their team, which is what the Go Bills guys did last year. I keep referring to that. Yep. They laid it out picture perfect when they had those. I think that was on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour.
Well,
and they laid out that they played they played Zay Jones
over Bam Knight.
Yes, and it was because they knew they could leapfrog all these teams because Zay Jones was so low owned, and it played out that way. Zay Jones ended up scoring 3 touchdowns. So
they were in the 50s, I want to say, or was it lower than 50? Maybe it was in the hundreds.
I think they started around 150.
Okay.
Yeah. So they weren't even that far down, but
right. In the 150s, and Mike Nick Costantino told us that he was I could be misquoting this, but I think this is how it went. He was kind of fist on the table towards the end of the week after they had Bam Knight in there all week. And he's like, look, if we want to do this again, this is a perfect way to vault up. Mm-hmm. And they gave you all the credit too. The last 2 years they've cited FantasyMojo as a huge part of their success too. And basically, I think it was on Saturday, they were like, okay, we're doing it. and they put Zay Jones in. Bam Knight has 6 carries for 2 yards or whatever it was, and Zay Jones gets 3 touchdowns. They get into first place. They went all the way up to first, heading into Week 16, and they held that league through Week 16 and through Week 17, and they win the $1 million. It was crazy. Second year in a row, which is insane. I never thought in these national tournaments that anybody would ever go back to back. And now not only did those guys go back to back in the main event, but Abibag Batoba from the 1st and 15 show, he went back to back in the FPC now. 2 years in a row, which is crazy to think about. Incredible feat by both those guys. Ray Chung is hanging out, a former guest of the show. Wanting to know what's considered way down, because we talk about being way down in the standings. Do you consider it a point value? Do you consider it like a team value? What would you define as way down?
Like I would say, spots in the leaderboard. The points is going to be sort of, it's going to depend on on any given year. But I think looking at where your rank is in the leaderboard is how you need to look at it. And then the other thing people need to think is there's a cash line too. So I think the cash line is the top 25%. So what you're doing, maybe not as aggressive moves. Let me make sure I'm in that cash line, because I think the minimum there is an extra $1,500 if you're just within those teams. But Nick and those guys, they were 156. When they decided to make that move. Now we've got the tournament's a little bit bigger this year, so we got 830 teams on the leaderboard. But way down is maybe. I mean, if I say way down, maybe 4 or 5. I was 580 last week, right? That's way down.
Right
now I'm 58. You can see what kind of a leap you can make in just 1 week.
What was the and I remember, I can't remember the exact tweet. Somebody came, was it the Fantasy Pros, or I think it was the Fantasy Pros. Somebody was in 1,300th place and now is in 4th overall, if I remember that correctly.
They were 3,000. I mean, they were that's really way down, but that's a much deeper leaderboard.
Right. But still being behind 3,000 teams, Darren, and then in 1 week you vault all the way up to
they got up to 21. But that's massive. That's a massive jump.
I can't even imagine watching that.
33-76 up to 21 because they scored the 3rd highest point total for the week, 219.
Wow.
So if your team balls out, you can, catch up, you can take up a lot of ground.
Yeah, that's insane. What's been kind of insanity this year, not so much worrying about a guy like DK Metcalf, because I think by and large, he's having a pretty good season. Inconsistent, not more any inconsistent than any other year for him. But what's been more difficult is Jackson Smith-Njigba and Tyler Lockett, trying to figure out if either of those guys, if either of them are worthy to start on any given week. They play Tennessee this weekend. Obviously, Smith-Njigba catches the big pass on Monday Night Football and gets into the end zone late. Is that enough for you to say, look, this is not trending the right way for Tyler Lockett at this point? I can't imagine his ownership is too high in either championship round, the Fantasy Pros or the main event. But this is a weird guy to try to trust right now in Tyler Lockett, Darren.
Yeah, he's 7.5% owned. But the thing is, Lockett, he's been getting the targets. He led him in targets. He had the most targets last week. He just didn't have the catches. But in general, Lockett he's more of a boom bust type of guy. So he's really a guy that fits more the profile. Let me throw him in there and see if he explodes. Maybe Tennessee's not the best spot, but it's within his range of outcomes. You could see him hitting, doing 20, 25 points if things go right, given that he's getting the targets. But it's net with Njigba, it's kind of it's a little bit more guesswork. Last year, it was basically just Metcalf and Lockett. Now you've got this third variable that you need to consider. But I wouldn't totally write him off. I would start Lockett personally before I would start Boyd, I think.
I'm with you on this, and I just looked it up here. Tyler Lockett, week 1, had 4 targets. That's been his lowest target number all season, and he's played in every single game so far. His targets over the last, let's just go back to week 8. I'll start in week 8 and work my way up to week 15 for targets. 9, 8, 10, 7, 5, 8, 6, and then again last night, Monday Night Football, he had 9 again. The other aspect of this, before we get too excited, he has not topped 94 receiving yards all season, and he's only got 4 touchdowns. So while he's getting the targets, he doesn't strike me as a player that's going to be like, if the stars align, this guy's going to throw up, a Zay Jones-ish week, for lack of a better term, to help you move up, Darren.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to get you 3 touchdowns because there's too many other mouths to feed. But I mean, I could see a 20-point game from him if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah,
I think it's possible. And he's well, he had the 25-point game. He had another 23-point game. 2 weeks ago, he had 15 points.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of like Lockett. I mean, he's one of the highest owned players that I drafted this year. And actually, Godwin and Evans were I think they were my top 10 most drafted players. So I kind of guessed right on a lot of those. But I kind of like Lockett. Seattle's going to be throwing the ball. So
was it the draft capital this year, and what you had to pay to get him in drafts that attracted you to Lockett, or what was it about him that made him appear on so many of your rosters?
Yeah, well, Lockett's always sort of underdrafted, right? He's perennially discounted, and that's the type of drafting that I'm a value-based drafter. So I'll grab the values of Evans and Godwin. They were depressed this year. I got those guys in I think the 6th, 7th rounds of the main event out in Vegas. So I'll gravitate to those types of players. Sometimes it won't work, but Lockett's one of those guys. So he's a boom bust guy. So
you and the GOAT District's Dan Williamson undoubtedly fighting over him in numerous best ball drafts over the summer.
Sniping each other.
Exactly. Saints and Rams on Thursday night. This is a kind of an intriguing game when you consider the state of each of these organizations, or at least each of these offenses. Obviously, no Michael Thomas. Chris Olave we think is going to play, but we don't know. And then the Rams with Cooper Kupp really coming back into view as a premier player. 8 catches, 8 targets last week, 120-some yards and touchdown, I think it was what it was. What about the Saints wideouts, though, specifically? If Olave plays, you're obviously playing him. If he's out, is there any advantage to starting a guy like Rasheed Shaheed or A.T. Perry? I mean, I got to believe that these guys are, again, players that you would only start in an emergency situation, or in a situation if you are literally at the bottom of the championship round, just hoping for any kind of miracle here. I don't know if we see one on Thursday night.
Yeah, well, there was a report about 2 hours ago from Nick Underhill, I guess is the beat writer.
Covers the Saints. Yep.
He says Olave is expected to play. So, but if he didn't, I would give Shaheed a shot if that's what you need. But again, I also kind of buy into that narrative that Thursday night games are sort of they kind of disappoint generally. Even the last week was sort of like a blowout, right? That was bananas, 63 points. But that was
right.
Like an outlier. That whole situation was off. It'll depend on what other options, whether you're willing to wait. And that's the other thing. There's going to be people kind of up in the air on Sunday as well. So that makes it even more difficult to pull the trigger on a guy on Thursday night.
Yeah.
It's do I, because it was like Josh Palmer last week. Well, I was waiting on these other guys, but now Josh Palmer's already kind of gone off. He would be maybe a possible flex if you just wanted to. I mean, if you're playing it safe, I mean, this is not the time to really play it safe. So what's the ceiling? And plus the tight ends there, Juwan Johnson and Jimmy Graham. I mean, I can't believe this guy's he's still playing, but
the Frank Gore of tight ends.
Jimmy Graham. He doesn't go away.
Right, exactly.
It's a bit of a guessing game after Olave.
You want to talk about NFL random drug testing? It should be drug testing that guy after every single game of how he's able to get up and play football at his age and play such a demanding position as that too.
Yep.
You could talk about your 58th place team here, Darren. You could talk about any of the teams in contention that you have. As far as managed lineup leagues go, do you have like any tough lineup decisions that you're trying to suss out right now, trying to figure out what I'm going to do, prior to Thursday night, prior to Saturday, or prior to Sunday?
So I'm in a there's a pros versus Joe's dynasty league I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to pick a running back. It's between Pacheco and Singletary. So Singletary's been surging, but now Pacheco's coming back. And normally you think he would be a slam dunk, but you got to wonder, like, are they going to kind of ease him back in and not give him the full workload coming with this injury, especially since CEH, not that he's like kind of, blowing people away, but he could absorb some of the punishment anyway that Pacheco might be getting. So they might kind of use him to soften the blow. So I'm kind of up in the air on that. We'll see. That's going to be a decision I'll have to make on Sunday, but that's a tough one for me.
And yeah, that's the thing. On the surface, it just seems like, oh, you play Pacheco and you forget about it. But there is more nuance to that as well when you consider the other factors at play and the fact that, Kansas City probably has a deep postseason run in mind, and they want to make sure that they're keeping Pacheco healthy for that. Jerick McKinnon also carried the ball 4 times last week. He had 3 catches. Edwards-Helaire, 4 for 64 and a touchdown. So certainly not only are these guys going to factor into the offense, when they had the lay of the land, the run of the backfield last week, they were putting up numbers. So they were very successful without Pacheco. So there is something to be concerned with about that. Singletary, and he was a guy that I wish I got on more leagues this year. So I don't have him on a ton of them. Last week, and I have to look at this right now, what he did in week 15. But that was they played the Titans, right?
Yep.
If I remember correctly. Oh, and he went over 100 yards. My God. The corpse, the body isn't even warm for Dameon Pierce. And Singletary has just been crushing it the second half of the season. 4 catches for 49 yards. Holy cow. I was ready to say you play Pacheco too. Now I really don't know. Houston this week is who do they have, Darren? Cleveland. They got Cleveland at home.
Okay.
So
that's a little bit of a tough draw, but I mean, Pierce has basically been.
I mean, they were using
down bad.
They were using Ogunbowale more than Pierce last week. So
Singletary's the guy, and Singletary also had a touchdown called back last week too. I think it was in overtime or leading up to overtime that he. So I mean, he's almost like a an undisputed ball, number one back for them at this point, whereas it was more a split earlier in the year. So I think I'm probably leaning towards Singletary just because he's going to get so many more touches.
I would think as the week goes on, and this is something, like we talk about this kind of stuff on a Tuesday night, there's so much more information that does come out and it helps us make our decisions. The Chiefs play at 1:00 on Christmas Day. So that complicates things a little bit more because you'll have to make a decision on this on Christmas Eve with Singletary going that day. But I mean, we're still 5 days away. You'd like to think that the Chiefs beat reporters are going to squeeze some more info out of Reed and sort of his plans for the Chiefs this week in their backfield. So we'll find out about that. Okay, let's do this. I normally end the interview or the show on this question, but I do have a couple of Fantasy Mojo questions for you, so we'll save those. Sleeper is a tough thing this time of year. If there is one guy that you would be looking to get in your lineups as a player that could have a big week and really vault you up the leaderboard in the FantasyPros Championship or the FFPC main event, who's that guy? And then conversely, a player that, you always say you start your studs, you start the guys that are getting it done for you. Maybe there's a player that you hoped would get it done, just hasn't been happening, and maybe now's the time to bench him. On both ends of the spectrum, Darren Armani, how do you weigh in on that?
I don't know if he's that high owned, but I'm kind of liking this Tanner Hudson character for Cincinnati with Chase being out, and he's been putting up some nice numbers, and you would think maybe he even builds on that even more this week.
5 for 49 last week against Minnesota.
Yeah. So that would be a guy. Let's see if see how many teams have him. Actually, he's at rather okay. So he's 8% owned. He was one of those guys that was picked up in the last couple waiver runs during the playoffs because they had control of the waiver wire. So actually, a lot of people have him, but they may not have been inclined to start him. So, but you're definitely going to see him in a lot of lineups this week.
Tanner Hudson. I just want to look this up here before you move on. Tanner Hudson at Pittsburgh this week, which I think we mentioned that already. So last week was the second most targets he's seen all season. He had 6 for 33, 6 catches for 33 yards in week 10 against the Texans. But he's kind of been a steady Eddie. I mean, he's hitting at a minimum at about 20 yards every single week. He's gotten into the end zone once already. And when you consider tight end premium scoring, he is an interesting guy to see if you can flex him out to see what happens. What about a guy you might not feel as confident about this week, Darren?
Well, I'm not benching him, but Kelce. I am nervous about Kelce, but I'm not benching him. Like it's going to be feast or famine. And just from a more macro level, I think we are kind of seeing the decline. He's definitely on the downside now. He does seem to be slowing down. We need to squeeze a few more games out of him this year. That's all we need before like he falls off the cliff.
Let me throw this at you from a. You obviously play Dynasty, Pros versus Joe's Dynasty, whatever. What about if you had him in Dynasty? Like, could you see a transition where Rasheed Rice is more the featured guy for the majority of the 2024 season, and Travis Kelce becomes the number 2 there?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it now. Every week the utilization for Rasheed Rice goes up and up, and I mean Rasheed Rice is the guy I'd be targeting. I'll be interested to see where Kelce goes in startup drafts for Dynasty next year, because he's still been a first-round pick.
The thing is, like, I've been not waiting, but I've been chickening out I have him in a Dynasty league, and I've been chickening out, in selling him in the offseason for years now. And now I'm thinking, well, I always say at the end of the season, okay, this offseason is the offseason to get rid of him. And I have Michael Mayer on that team. And I just thought it'd just be a nice transition that once Mayer's, doing a Laporta or doing a Kincaid, then I can just move on from Kelce. And it hasn't happened yet. And I keep saying I'm not going to do it. The more I think about it, I think I am. I think I'm going to be the bag holder on Travis Kelce, where when he does fall off the cliff, I'll be right at the edge waving at him on the way down. Or maybe when he falls off the cliff, it's going to be right on top of me, Darren. That's probably what's going to happen.
It gets to the point you hold on to him too long, and then you're not going to get.
You can't get anything.
You might as well just hold on to him until you completely drain any value out of him.
I would say I did that with Hines Ward for years and years. You could never get anything for Hines Ward, and then he's still putting up top 20 numbers for I don't know how he did it, but he did it.
Sometimes
it does work. FantasyMojo.com is your one-stop shop. Not everybody knows about all the ADP and the draft boards and everything you feature during drafting season. We're coming up on the fantasy world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge, which you have a ton of data for that every single year. But right now, if you go to FantasyMojo.com, the 3 big things, the player ownership, the stack summary, and the championship round stack explorer, probably your most 3 valuable friends as you're setting lineups, because as you said, you can't manufacture a title at this point. You got to figure out a way to do it with the guys that you have on your roster. Those 3 tools, pretty invaluable for somebody who's trying to win $1 million.
Yeah, if you're trying to navigate the 3-week sprint, it's the next level of information, which, I mean, the information is there if you want to like pick and choose through the leaderboards and dig into the teams, but we've got all the data aggregated and summarized, and you can like pivot on it and just at a glance see who has a specific player, where they are in the leaderboard, or any combination of players, which is, like I said, I'm the only guy who has, well, there's 3 guys who have, Evans, Godwin's combos. Like you can mix and match and do what you want. So that's important. And we also just after this broadcast, actually, I'm going to be posting the ownership percentages of the players in all of the best ball tourney second week, round 2.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
So that's important. And I think I tweeted out earlier today that like Justin Jefferson he advanced less teams than Nick Chubb. So if you're holding Justin Jefferson right now, I mean, he's like a gold chip for you that can really, separate you from the crowd as you move forward.
Nick Chubb, better fantasy football pick than Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, somehow he's getting strung along. So that stuff's out there, and then probably right after Christmas we'll release all the playoff challenge information, which is historical information is very important in that you can see all of the lineups from last year's competition. You can look at the winners, how they constructed their lineups and whatnot, and see what places they finished in. But one of the real things that's important is we take a deep dive into like the winning lineups, and then I've got this optimizer tool that I use, and I've identified what the perfect lineup is.
Oh,
so I can tell you right now that 24,000 teams put in lineups last year between the $200 and the $35 level, and the highest scoring team was 562. Out of all those 24,000 teams, there was actually a lineup that you could have built that scored 612 points.
Wow.
So we'll go into like, what is the difference between like this lineup that was sitting out there? Like, what did you have to do differently to kind of, you didn't even need to have the perfect lineup. You had a 50-point gap between number one and just, the ultimate lineup. So Adam Krautwer says it's like the best thing on the site, so everybody likes different things about it, but he particularly likes that. But the playoff challenges, it really goes into a lot of details if you're into that competition.
That's just crazy to think about. Think about how much time we waste, trying to formulate lineups and figure out what the best possible lineup is. And, some people enter multiple lineups and they'll have differentiation on those. And after all that time and effort, you could have submitted reasonably, a lineup that absolutely would have slaughtered the $500,000 winning lineup last year, or the $100,000 winning lineup too, which is crazy.
And when you see what the difference is, it's like, well, that doesn't seem like such a leap. It's not like it was this crazy outlier that nobody would have picked. It was very simple construction differences that you could have done. So now I've got data for this for the past 4 years. There are definite patterns in what these winning lineups look like, how you need to construct your lineup. So we'll go into that. That's going to be something people can look forward to.
I think oftentimes when we put out on social media with the FFPC, we'll put out on social media like the winning lineup, or I'll put it in one of the FFPC emails that I send out every week, and people look at it and they're like, that won the 500,000, that beat every, it's crazy to think. The best way I can compare it is the winning. Remember what was the big rage in like the 90s? Like from Mallrats, there's that episode of Seinfeld where he had the 3-dimensional picture, and you kind of had to like, in order to see the picture inside, you kind of had to like unfocus your eyes, or you had to like kind of
stare at it.
And then all of a sudden the thing would hit you, like Ethan Suplee in Mallrats. It's a schooner or whatever. I think that's what it's like trying to find the perfect lineup. You can be looking at this and analyzing this, right? And that perfect lineup, if you just look right, it'll just come to you, right? Didn't come to anybody last year. Maybe it'll come to somebody this year, maybe with the help of FantasyMojo.com. The last thing I'm going to say about your website here, and this is something that I've never heard anybody do before, and this is what an honest and upstanding guy Darren Armani is. I can't remember the show. It might have been the High Stakes Fantasy Football show that you did back in September, October with me. I can't remember. But I was asking you about Mojo, and obviously, and one thing I didn't mention on the show tonight is, you put out those waiver bids every week, which is great. You can see the most a guy went for, the least a guy who got dropped, everything like that. And I said, I was trying to promote the website, and you said back then, you're like, well, now's not really the time you want to, plunk down some money and subscribe. You don't really want to do it now. So you literally know when Darren Armani is telling you now's the time to subscribe, whether it be drafting season or coming up on the playoff challenge. This literally is the time to subscribe. Yeah. Like, you really want to make sure that you have these tools on your side when you try to win $500,000 or either one of the $1 million grand prizes.
Yeah. If you've invested thousands of dollars into building these teams, it's a drop in the bucket to just open the door to, the wealth of information that we have. Now's when you do it. Now are the money weeks, so.
Fantasy Mojo on the X, FantasyMojo.com is where you need to be going to that to subscribe right now. Good luck to you. Main event, Fantasy Pros Championship, your dynasty leagues, all your best balls, everything that you got going on, Darren. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, and hopefully you're getting that $1 million check cut in a few weeks. We'll see what happens.
We'll see if Alex actually signs it. He'll feel begrudgingly.
If you win, we'll have to break down and buy the big check and make a big presentation. We'll fly out to Pennsylvania. It'll be great. It's going to be fantastic.
Nice.
Be good, dude. Thank you so much for hopping aboard. So much fun tonight. We'll do this again soon.
All right. Talk to you later.
You got it. That's Darren Armani from Fantasy Mojo at Fantasy Mojo on X, FantasyMojo.com. Please subscribe right now. You will thank yourself later for all the tools that you can have in trying to win the $1 million grand prize in the FFPC main event or the Fantasy Pros Championship as well. The world famous FFPC Playoff Challenge is coming up as well. You want to make sure that you are signing up for that. MyFFPC.com. 2 great contests. $200 entry will get you into the into the running for a $500,000 grand prize. You can enter for $35 and still win $100,000, which is pretty awesome. You choose 12 players that you want throughout the duration of the playoffs. You don't mix and match them throughout the playoffs. Like once your 12-player lineup is locked in by kickoff of that first wildcard game, that is your lineup for the duration of the playoffs. MyFFPC.com is where to go for that. Also go to MyFFPC.com, MyFFPC.com to play in any one of the 3 weekly challenges we have. Lineups lock on Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday, depending upon which challenge you want to be in, the Thursday, Saturday, or Sunday one. Just choose 10 or 12 players there. Again, you can play with kickers and defenses or without. $35 to enter, $200 to enter. You can win up to $2,500. No stacking, 1 player per team, just like the playoff challenge as well. That will complete our show tonight. We'll be live again. We will do a show the day after Christmas on Tuesday. That's coming up at 10 o'clock Eastern next Tuesday. This Thursday night, 7 o'clock till 9, will be your pregame. Fantasy Football Night in America will be live on the Better Sports Network, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with yours truly from 7 until 9 with Pat Fitzmaurice from Fantasy Pros. He's going to join me for the full 2 hours. And then, of course, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour this Friday night, a special Christmas edition with Farrell Elliott, the commissioner of the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship. He and I and a special guest will get you set for week 2 of the championship round. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, share, and get notified every time we go live. Your week officially, well, I shouldn't say that. That's a different show. But I will say that we will go live on Thursday. If this is the only show you watch in the FFPC channel, God bless you. We appreciate you. Happy holidays. But don't forget, we got other shows coming down the way as well. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully the ball bounces your way in Week 16. Talk to you on Thursday night. Thank you for listening to the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. And thanks to Grapes for our theme music. Please review the podcast on iTunes under the RotoViz radio feed. It helps us find new listeners. Contact us via email, rotovizradio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, and follow us on Twitter at RotoVizRadio. And remember, you can always support the show by subscribing to RotoViz at a 10% discount through the NFL podcast homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast.